The leader of UKIP, Gerard Batten, recently appeared on LBC and discussed various topics with presenter Matt Frei. These range from Brexit to Tommy Robinson, and I thought it would be interesting to discuss some of what they had to say.
Have you drawn up your list of candidates?
Oh, we've been preparing for this for months because we've reluctantly had to concede that the whole process is being betrayed, and the likely outcome was we weren't going to leave and we'd take part in the European elections. We would much prefer that we'd left and we weren't taking part in the European elections, but it was my responsibility to prepare for it. We've selected our candidates. All we have to do now in the next few days is place them in the list so we know who's number one, who's 2, 3 and 4, etc. That's a process we'll do in the next couple of days, and we're ready to fight.
I would like to say this is untrue, but regrettably it does look like Britain will have to take part in the European elections. But this gives UKIP a massive opportunity to boost their supporter base. Because the European parliamentary elections use proportional representation instead of first past the post, it means that UKIP actually gets properly represented, while under first past the post they don't. Gerard Batten even mentions this point in the interview.
We can win in European elections because it's proportional representation. So we do in order to represent the British people who want to leave, and we promote that message. And I can't wait for the day when we have proportional representation in the House of Commons. We have a reformed House of Lords where we have a PR elected second amending chamber, and then we'll see how people like my party get on and how other parties get on, and accept the democratic outcome rather than the stitched-up, managed, corrupt system we've got now.
While the first-past-the-post voting system does work, it is unrepresentative of the people, and so in the long run is undemocratic, in my opinion. While I don't think that we will ever achieve true proportional representation, and quite frankly I find the idea of mob rule to be immoral in itself, I think that we can achieve something along the lines of an additional membership system, like they have in Wales for the National Assembly elections. But I digress.
Is Tommy Robinson on that list?
No, absolutely not. He's not a member of the party. He can't join the party unless the rules were not changed, but interpreted to allow him to do that. That isn't on my agenda. My agenda now is to fight these elections and to get the best possible result.
As expected, Matt Frei immediately brings the conversation to Tommy Robinson, because if you've got Gerard Batten on your show, you might as well promote an agenda of UKIP being a far-right extremist party while you're at it. Tommy Robinson cannot be an MEP for UKIP because he is not a member of UKIP. He is merely an advisor to Gerard Batten on certain subjects, most notably Islam, and the Islamification of many parts of British society.
So you are ruling out here on the record that he will ever run as an MEP for your party?
It's never been possible. And he wouldn't be considered anyway, with all due respect to him and everybody else. The only people that have been selected are ones that have either had a proven track record of loyalty to the party, have fought previous elections for the party, or in 1 or 2 cases which are going to give us a bit of fun in that election, are people who can give us a lot more exposure in the social media.
By exposure on social media, he is of course talking about the 4 main YouTube personalities who have joined UKIP recently: Sargon of Akkad, Count Dankula, Milo Yiannopoulos and Paul Joseph Watson. As of the upload date of this video, Count Dankula has confirmed that he will be running as an MEP for UKIP. He says his main concerns will be to do with issues such as Article 13, which is great, because not enough is being discussed with regards to the negative impact Article 13 will have across the entirety of the European Union. It is quite frankly a piece of backwards legislation made by boomers who have no idea how the internet works.
Just to get back to Tommy Robinson briefly, he's still your advisor, as you've just told us. What do you take his advice on, and what kind of advice does he give you?
He hasn't actually been able to do a great deal for me because he's been preoccupied with other matters. But he is a man who goes up and down the country interviewing victims of these grooming gangs, which I haven't got the time to do, and he wants to put together a body of evidence on that. And what he's going to concentrate on when he gets able to spend his time doing that properly is not that it happened or who did it, but who covered it up. The local authorities, the police, and elements of the Labour Party in different regions where this has gone on. And that's what he wants to uncover, and that's why the establishment want to destroy him.
Tommy Robinson has essentially become the enemy of the state, all because of his reporting on these Muslim rape gangs. gangs which the government failed to indict and prosecute accordingly. If it was revealed who actually covered up these events, then the ensuing backlash could lead to the end of several safe seats around the country. Obviously, the government cannot allow this to happen, so they tend to use Tommy Robinson's past against him by taking pieces of information out of context and twisting them to form a narrative that Tommy Robinson is secretly some white nationalist trying to destroy all Muslims and send them back to whence they came. The truth is that they cherry-pick certain pieces of information to paint him in a bad light. Yes, he was a founding member of the EDL, but he also left the EDL after finding out what it was turning into, and that he actively tried to prevent Nazis from joining the group, even getting arrested for punching one in the face.
But, I mean, you're UKIP, right? That's the independent, UK Independence Party. You're all about the European Union. What are you doing, fanning hatred against Islam? What's that got to do with politics?
Will you explain to me how I fan hatred against Islam? Matt, okay. Tell me how I fan hatred.
Well, you called Islam a death cult.
Yeah. I talk about the ideology of the belief system, which other people do as well. There's an excellent book on this by a chap called Peter McLaughlin that analyses the whole thing. I'm concerned about the ideology. I have nothing against individuals or groups of individuals.
I would say that anybody who believes in the principles of British democracy should have a problem with the growing influence of Islam in this country, more specifically with the growing influence of Wahhabism and Salafism. As I described in my video on the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto, Wahhabism and Salafism are both fundamentalist interpretations of Islam. They are ultra-conservative, they are very austere, and they're incompatible with British values. But most importantly, they are being promoted worldwide by the Saudi Arabian government, with vast amounts of funding. As a result, the amount of mosques adhering to Wahhabism and Salafism has been on the rise over the last 10 or 20 years. According to this article from The Week, in 2015 around 8.6% of British mosques were Salafi. And yes, before you get angry at me, not all Muslims adhere to these ideologies. But it is a growing problem and if not tackled soon, might get out of control.
So you stood up in the European Parliament and you said to Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker, you have done what Philip of Spain, Napoleon and Kaiser Wilhelm and Hitler couldn't do. You brought Britain to its knees without firing a single shot. But you could not have done any of these things without the connivance of the traitors, the quislings and the collaborators in the British Parliament and the British establishment.
Absolutely true.
That's just nonsense, isn't it?
No, Matt. That statement is entirely accurate. It describes exactly what has happened in British politics. We have been betrayed by our political class. The very structure of the House of Commons is unrepresentative of the will of the people. 2/3 of MPs are pro-Remain, compared to the 52% of voters who voted Leave during the referendum. The Prime Minister herself is pro-Remain at heart, so obviously she's going to be more lenient towards the EU. And don't even get me started on Jeremy Corbyn flip-flopping between Leave and Remain in order to guarantee party support. And virtually all of the minor parties want a second referendum in order to overturn the results of the first. That is not democratic. That is going against the will of the people. That is traitorous. The only party actually committed by nature to delivering the result of the referendum is UKIP.
I wrote a little book about 4 years ago in which I explained if there was a referendum, if Leave won, this is what the establishment would do. They would delay it, they would impede it with the aim of overturning it. There's been an excellent article written...
But that's got nothing to do with Europe.
Let me just finish the point, please. There's an excellent article been written last week in Politico magazine by Tom McTague, which goes into detail about how this whole thing was lost. It's called How the UK Lost Brexit. And it's an excellent article that analyses this whole thing and explains how from day one the EU worked with the British establishment to make this not happen. And the biggest mistake was right at the beginning when they triggered Article 50, when they should have set it aside and not gone down the Article 50 road. None of this would have been possible if we were playing by our rules and not the EU's rules.
I'll leave a link to the article in the description below, but it describes many of the UK's tactical blunders with regards to Brexit. By triggering Article 50, we handed over our fate into the EU's hands. And why would they want our best interests if we're leaving? Surely it would be easier to try and create a Brexit fatigue in order to justify overturning the result of the referendum. I think this quote from the article by Alan Duncan pretty much sums up the whole situation. It is a crisis caused by bad decisions on top of bad decisions, turning a short-term gambit into a long-term catastrophe, he added. You can trace the whole thing back to the start. The crash was always coming. Theresa May's weaknesses gives the EU an upper hand in the negotiations. It means that they can toy with her and push her about like a rag doll. This is why Brexit has been delayed, and we might have to take part in European elections.
To use the language, traitors, quislings and collaborators, that is precisely the kind of language that the police has warned against, because it's too inflammatory.
So now the police might pay me a visit because of something I've said in the European Parliament. Well, they can if they like.
Judging from the recent actions of the police, I wouldn't be surprised.
Let me explain the origin of the word treason. It's from the Latin traditio, which means to hand over. And what could have been more treasonous than the last 46 years of our national life when power's been handed over to a foreign power, which is the European Union? Our whole membership of the European Union has been unlawful under our constitution because there can be no higher authority than the Queen in Parliament, and yet they have purported to hand over authority and lawmaking ability to a foreign power. The whole thing is treasonous, and it's about time we called people out for what they are.
While I agree with the sentiment, because of our uncodified constitution, we can essentially change and ratify things at will. This is why I'm in favour of a codified constitution like in the US. But that's a discussion for another day.
But you're comparing EU leaders to Adolf Hitler.
No, I said they've done something that those people hadn't done.
I mean, that's just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, it shows an incredibly thin understanding of history.
It doesn't at all. They have done things that those people weren't able to do. That doesn't mean I'm comparing them to. Even Mr. Juncker had a little laugh when I said it. He's got a sense of humour. I don't think those people are bad. I think that they have an objective, which is to make us subject to the EU, and they've succeeded in doing it. Other people couldn't make us subject to the Spanish Empire or the French Empire or the German Empire, but they've made it possible to do it to the EU.
Matt Frei obviously wants to push an agenda here, so I'm going to tackle it head on. Gerard Batten was clearly saying that while past European leaders have failed to conquer Europe through violence, the EU has done it in peacetime. And you misconstruing his language isn't fooling anyone except yourself.
Ultimately, the reason why we might not be leaving the EU is because we can't agree on how we, in this country, our parliament, our leaders cannot agree on how to leave the EU.
Well, exactly. That's why I've called them quislings and collaborators, because they don't want to. If it would be quite simple if you'd have done it the way I said it should be done. You say we're not going down the Article 50 road. We repeal the 1972 European Communities Act. But then you say to the EU, well, don't worry, because there won't be chaos, because all of your law has been transposed into our law as Acts of Parliament. We're going to offer you, as a kick-off, we're going to offer you continued tariff-free trade or WTO, your choice. You can have equal rights for citizens, no problem, we'll give you that. Then we'll start to dismantle, amend and repeal all the 19,000 directives, 170,000 individual bits of legislation, and we'll do that according to our priorities and timescale.
Gerard Batten has clearly done a vast amount of research in order to adopt his position on the European Union. And because he knows how the EU negotiate, he has adopted, quite frankly, an empathetic Brexit strategy that will not only benefit the EU but also the UK. By contrast, Theresa May doesn't understand how the EU negotiates, and even if she did, she's too weak-willed to negotiate properly.
But use words like traitors, quislings and collaborators is just frankly unacceptable.
Why is it?
This is because it's not the language of democracy.
We live in a free country.
It doesn't make
Matt.
you a Democrat, it makes you an extremist.
No, it doesn't make me an extremist. First of all, I think it actually makes me truthful, and there's an awful lot of people listening to this programme that's going to agree that it's truthful. They can disagree if they want to as well, because that's what it means to live in a free country. And what I'm concerned in now increasingly is there are only things which are allowed to be said and other things which are not allowed to be said, which are not subject to the criminal law, by the way.
This is again a correct statement. However, it may not be for much longer, as the UK verges further and further towards censorship. Currently, under the Communications Act of 2003, a person is guilty of an offence if he sends by means of a public electronic communications network a message or other material that is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character. The term grossly offensive is inherently a subjective statement. It depends on who's making the laws, so no wonder that in recent years we've seen people be arrested for making jokes online, or misgendering someone, or tweeting the lyrics out to a song. This is how bad it's getting, to the point where I don't even consider Britain to be a free country anymore.
I'm talking about judgment here. You said recently we need now to behead the political class politically at the ballot box.
Exactly.
Right. But to behead the political class, this is after one MP was shot and knifed dead, and another one, as we just discovered last week, received an extreme right-wing death threat. I mean, this is just irresponsible language, isn't it?
No, Matt. As Gerard Batten demonstrates, you are taking his words out of context. Stop doing it to push your agenda.
You did note there, thank you for saying that I said politically at the ballot box.
But you could have also chosen not to use the word behead.
Well, I could have chosen to use 1,000 other words, but they're the ones I did choose to, because I was making a speech in Whitehall where in 1649, Charles I, who put himself in opposition to Parliament, actually did lose his head. And now
we've moved on a bit since then, haven't we?
Now Parliament has put itself in opposition to the people, and they need to go politically. And I was making a comparison, but a purely political one.
And there you have it. Gerard Batten isn't calling for the physical execution of the political class, but the political execution of the political class, in that you take power away from them by voting.
There's a lot of people out there that come up to me, and there's a lot of people are joining UKIP because they like somebody who speaks in plain language and says what they think, and that's what I do.
One of the things I dislike most about the intellectual middle class is how unempathetic they are to people who don't speak on the same linguistical level as them, and it gives them a sense of superiority, so that they can say, oh, you're just uneducated. And what has made politicians like Gerard Batten, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro so popular is the fact that they speak simple language that everyone can understand, and that there's no jargon to solve your way through to get to the core message. It's simple, it's quick, and it works. And it may seem hypocritical coming from someone who tends to use intellectual jargon quite a bit, but it's one thing when it comes from a small political commentator, and another when coming from a well-established politician.
Personally, what I think the way to break this logjam in the tribalism in politics is to have a reform voting system. One of our primary policies now is to have a proportional representation system so that people get what they vote for.
I believe that it is definitely time for electoral reform. First past the post has ensured that people do not get what they vote for, and that the dual-party system stays in place. While I think a system of proportional representation would be fine, my ideal system would be a mixed one. For example, my preferred system is the additional member system, although AV Plus would also be a great system to adopt. Describing how each one works would take up a video in itself, so I'll leave some links to some articles giving information about how they work.
When government ministers say, as they've said again this morning, that if we delay Brexit for too long, if we get another referendum, we are going to tease out the right-wing and left-wing extreme elements in British politics, right? They're talking about you, aren't they?
Well, I'm not a right-wing extremist, I'm not a left-wing extremist. You've got the left-wing extremists in Commons now. You've got a Marxist, anti-Semitic Labour Party.
Let me take the time to remind you what Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell had to say after the 2008 financial crisis.
We've got to demand systemic change. I'm honest with people. I'm a Marxist. You know, this is a classic crisis of the economy, classic capitalist crisis. I've been waiting for this for a generation. For Christ's sake, don't waste it. You know, let's use this to explain to people this system based on greed and profit does not work. What we need is a system based upon planning for need and democratically controlled.
You know, that system that has led to innovation on an unprecedented scale and countless number of lives saved? According to John McDonnell, that doesn't work. Give me a break.
And you're an anti-Islamic,
No,
anti-death cult Islamic right-wing extremist.
I'm not right-wing.
With a right-wing thug as your advisor.
Let me, first of all, I'm not right-wing. I have policies, for example, purely a personal view. It isn't a party policy. I'd be quite happy to renationalise all the utilities. I think it was a massive con. I agree with Jeremy.
You're a National Socialist.
No.
Matt, shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. Let Gerard Batten finish and stop trying to be a comedian.
But if you're going to call me right-wing, Matt, tell me what right-wing is, please. You
Actually, I
define
call you extreme right-wing.
Why would you? Define what that means.
Because you're Islamophobic. You stir up hatred, against minorities in this country, and you liken EU leaders to Adolf Hitler. I mean, that is just unacceptable.
None of what you have just talked about is mutually exclusive to the right wing. There are also racists on the left. What do you think the whole anti-Semitism situation in Labour has been about? Karl Marx wrote an entire book on the Jewish question, so none of what you're saying makes sense.
About an ideology. I don't like totalitarian ideologies. I don't want to live under one, whether it be a left-wing, right-wing or Islamic.
But you're not living under one, you're living in a democracy.
Exactly, and I want to keep it that way, which is why I'm defending it, and I do not want to live, and I don't want my descendants to live under an Islamic totalitarian system.
Which they're not about to,
Well, they would if they lived in an Islamic country like Saudi Arabia or
Britain.
Bahrain, where they brought back Sharia.
Saudi Arabia, we're in Britain.
Exactly, now we are, but let's keep it that way. Let's defend it and keep it that way.
Is there any suggestion that it might not be that way?
In the future, yes.
Come on.
Well,
you don't really believe that, do you?
In the future, yes.
Matt, you must have heard of the Iranian Revolution, which turned an emerging democracy into a Sharia dictatorship.
What, you think there'll be Sharia law in Britain?
Yes. They've told the fundamentalists and the literalist interpreters, who are the people that I have a problem with, these are saying that that's what they want in Britain in the long term.
Well, I mean, the Scientologists want us all to live on a distant planet in the long term. It's not going to happen.
If there aren't more and more Scientologists.
You say that.
Yes, and if there were more and more of them emerging, I would be opposing them too.
I mean, come on, you've got to. The trouble is, this is the problem with people like you, is that you take
people like
you, extremists.
I'm extremist.
You are an inflammatory.
You know, Matt,
extremist.
we live in a surreal world.
You take something that's a niche opinion.
It's not a niche opinion.
A niche opinion, and you say this is going to be what's running our country. That is just nonsense.
As I said earlier in this video, this has grown to the point where this is no longer a niche opinion. More and more mosques are adhering to the fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. You should be opposed to it. Anyone who supports democracy should be opposed to it. Muslims should be opposed to it. And so when I see Muslim activists going out and encouraging Islamic reforms, I support them. I don't know why you're not. The only way that Islam can reform is if you support the reformists.
The primary job of a politician is to prevent preventable evils, and that doesn't mean tomorrow. It means 10 years and 20 years and 30 years in the future. And if we had more politicians who could think long term, we'd be better off.
One of the main problems we're having in politics is that too many politicians are thinking in the present. Not enough are thinking about long-term impacts of their policies. This is why when politicians say, oh, Brexit will be damaging to businesses, yes, maybe in the short term, but think long term. Think past that blip in the economy and think to the potential growth and expansion that Britain may receive in the future if led correctly. Why are you just thinking about what will happen tomorrow if Brexit were to happen? And as a result, Brexit has been delayed once, it probably will be delayed again, And that's just going to have catastrophic consequences on business certainty.
And it's a funny old world, isn't it now, where you're accused of being a right-wing extremist when you want to defend your own constitution, your own laws, your own tradition, your own democratic parliamentary government.
Gerard Batten, welcome to Clown World.
But the constitution, the traditions, the values of this country are not under threat from Islamic extremism. They are just not.
This is a section from a study conducted by Ipsos Mori on social attitudes in the Muslim community. Apparently, 52% of the surveyed Muslims disagree that homosexuality should be legal in Britain, while half of surveyed men and a third of women agree that wives should always obey their husbands. When over half of surveyed Muslims are comfortable with admitting that they think homosexuality shouldn't be legal, you have a problem on your hands. You have something that goes against British values, the values of tolerance and equal treatment.
See, you've used the term people like me, so I'll use the term people like you, who live in this kind of liberal elite.
No, I'm not. You don't know anything about my politics.
Well, you don't know anything about mine, really.
Well,
you just called me a
You're a
right-wing
politician. You're the leader of a party.
You just called me a right-wing extremist. But you see, you belong to that group of people who just want to live in this cloud cuckoo land where it's not a problem, it's not going to be a problem in the future, so people like me must be wrong because they talk about it.
I can hardly blame Gerard Batten here for having to stoop to this guy's level. He is just so insufferable at this point. But he is one of the political liberal elite, as he describes. He is stuck in a bubble. He does not have to be exposed to any of these realities. He does not feel the consequences of them. And when he does, I'm sure he'll be going, "Oh, wait, oh, help me, save me, what are we doing?" But since he doesn't feel any of these burdens, he feels that he has to be some kind of white knight for the so-called oppressed minority, which Muslims simply aren't. I'm sure many of them would like to regard themselves as strong and historically very successful. But it's as if the liberal elite can no longer hold themselves back from defending any minority against the power and the evils of the white man.
UKIP was elected with 24 MEPs last time round, which is, massive chunk. And now you've got how many?
7.
So what happened to the others?
Quite a few of them left before I took over. Some of them have left, I think, some of them have said they don't like what I'm doing. OK, so why didn't they stay? One thing I would say about all of these people, they signed a pledge when they became MEPs for UKIP that said if they left the party for whatever reason, they would hand the seat back to UKIP, to the next person on the UKIP list.
That is a completely reasonable pledge to sign, and I'm disappointed that most UKIP MEPs who have left haven't handed their seats back, including Nigel Farage, who has honestly disappointed me these last few months. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still like the guy, but I think he's more in it for the show business than for the actual politics.
Will you be obstructive in the European Parliament?
We never vote for EU legislation. We have a clear policy which all our candidates sign up to, which is we don't recognise their legitimate, democratic, legitimate right to legislate over us. We oppose all legislation. We only vote for amendments within legislation where that returns power to the nation state, and that doesn't happen very often.
I have a funny feeling that this European election is going to see a lot of Eurosceptics get voted to the Parliament. And as a result, the EU is going to have a lot of problems on its hands trying to pass legislation. Or not. It's highly bureaucratic after all. Nevertheless, if we're forced to take part in these European elections, and I have a bad feeling we might be, get out there and vote UKIP. They're the People's Party. I've had a great time with them so far. You won't get the weasel words that you get with the other parties. They will actually deliver on the results of the referendum. So vote UKIP and, if possible, join them.
What matters in the final analysis is how many people votes for you. Politics is about votes. And if people vote for me, I'm happy. If they don't, fair enough. I don't have to do this. I'm doing this out of sense of duty and responsibility.